All praises to Allah, the Almighty, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Salam be upon Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, humanity, Pakistan, and you all who are here. Thank you so much for being here. I am indeed grateful to Senator, former Minister Javed Jabbar Sahab for being kind to accept my invitation and come here and launch his books. It's not the first time he has been invited before as well, and it is always a delight, always a pleasure to listen to him about his books or any other topic, or to mentor, or to chair a session. I'm also very grateful to Chairman of IPRI Board of Governors, Ambassador Inam Saab, Zahid Saab, Haris Sahab. मैम आपके लिए जिन लोगों का मैं नाम ना ले सकूं, Ambassador Durrani, General Durrani is also here, and Shah Jamal, and all of you, Zahid Saab. Thank you so much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for coming here, taking time out. और normally ये होता है कि 3 बजे का time जो होता है ना ज़रा ख़तरनाक सा time होता है. Although we had been trying to rope him in 11 o'clock karte hain, but I think it couldn't be managed. So 3 o'clock normally people don't come, and I hope that you will not regret, because Javed Jabbar Sahab is not going to let you doze off or regret that you are here. I went through both the books, Streams and this book, the Shade to Light, Shade and Light. This is one book which I am reading, going forward, coming back, opening in the middle, rereading again and again. It is so interesting, so wonderful. These two anthologies, which is Streams and also the Shade and Light, are kind of conjoined books, and I think you enjoy them when you read them together. I think his book's title is very nice. I'll begin from here. He could have said Darkness to Light, but he's, I think, decided to live with shades and light. It's a book, humor in wisdom, wisdom packed in humor. And also, it's kind of daydreaming also. He brings back Quaid-e-Azam here, and he portrays, if Quaid-e-Azam was here and he was reborn, what would he do to this country, and how would he actually resolve the problems? In this way, he has identified the problems and also given recipes in a very, very subtle manner, in a very, very wonderful manner. I'll actually not take too much of thunder out of his speech by quoting too much, but he has actually identified the ills that beset our governance, society, individual and collective behavior, and how to bring it to light. Pakistan ko, he has prescribed it also. Someone may say, utopian ideas हैं, possible नहीं है, ये हो नहीं सकता है. But दुनिया में क्या possible नहीं है? We have seen around, we have seen countries grow. He has quoted example of Lee Kuan Yew. He has also quoted the example of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, a person who ruled the country after so much of long time spent in jail, just for 5 years, and later on he declined to become the prime minister again. Lee Kuan Yew, he was ruling, for example, for almost whole life. So वो जो होता है incumbency कि जी कोई बंदा बहुत देर रह जाए तो शायद performance गड़बड़ कर जाती है. I think the examples are very, very different. But what is more interesting, I will read few of his remarks. What he writes in the beginning: I have deliberately dedicated this book to those who have never read any of my writings, in the vain hope that, unlike those who have read my outpourings and have survived to rise to the good health once again, some new innocents may be led astray to hopefully find a few elements to reflect upon, to change, or possibly even to conquer. I think, sir, ये ऐसे नहीं होगा. Innocents led astray नहीं होंगे. Anyone who reads your book, will be benefiting. I also like to quote just 2 lines. What he wrote about Mao, he said, "We should be modest and prudent, guard against arrogance and rashness, and serve the Chinese people with heart and soul. I think this is one character which one looks for in any of the leader of the country. When talking of Mohtaram Hazrat, I would say Qaid-e-Azam Rahmatullah Alayh, he has given so many things that he was against violence, he was against extremism, he was open-minded, he accepted all, and he had lots of tolerance for difference of opinion. I think there is so much we could learn from Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Senator Jabbar has covered Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, our relationship with international community, our relationship with Afghanistan, with the United States, then times of Musharraf and other times. And he has very candidly written at one place that would it have been good if Musharraf Sahib has left after 3 years which were given to him by the courts. So with these few words, sir, once again, thank you for accepting this invitation. And we would like to hear from you. We would like to learn from you. And it is going to be very, very enriching, actually, talk by him. Hadia. Thank you, Hadia.
Thank you, Ambassador Dr. Raza. We will now move on to hear the valuable comments on these books from Mr. Haris Khalique. Mr. Haris Khalique is a leading poet and essayist in English, Urdu, and Punjabi. With 10 collections of poetry and 2 books of non-fiction, including 3 bestsellers, he has co-edited and guest-edited books and literary journals. He has published several hundred articles and columns in publications ranging from Dawn and The News to the New York Times and The Hindu. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, Khawateen wa Hazrat. I have jotted down some notes, but Javed sahab mukhtasar guftugu, lekin dono kitabein pad ke. First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Javed sahab for collecting and compiling some of his work in Streams and Shade and Light. And thank you, Paramount Books, as well, for publishing these books. And I'm also grateful to Islamabad Policy Research Institute for hosting us this afternoon and bringing us all together to celebrate the importance of these works. I have a personal association with Javed Sahab. People close to him fondly call him JJ, and that's how I'm going to refer to him because that's what I call him otherwise. And it goes back to his youth and my childhood. My late father, who was himself a documentary filmmaker and a film buff, was very fond of JJ's cinematic achievements, work, and his creative advertising. Later on, I found out that he was my senior in school, and I had the privilege of being the secretary of the same debating society which JJ had founded 21 years later. Then he was on the board of directors of a non-profit development organization where I served for 8 years. And what I always found inspiring, the bunyadi baat jo hai, was his deep commitment to charitable and community development causes, in addition to him being an expert communications professional, a voracious reader, and an immensely engaging writer. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately and globally, we live in the age of pygmies, jesters, and lopsided individuals. What stands out and is striking in JJ's work is the complexity, diversity, and range of subjects and themes. His rich experience from art, culture, and media to politics and diplomacy informs his writing. Besides, his expression is laced with knowledge and insights that he has gathered over the years. Streams looks at the state of media very closely, and it's very relevant today, and does not pause at critiquing it, but offers practical recommendations in legal, legislative, regulatory, and editorial areas. He has also evaluated the challenges faced by democracy and the evolving cultural markers of Pakistan. He's very optimistic. From Aslam Azhar to Irfan Hussain, a number of interesting pen portraits are also included in streams. South Asia remains a constant concern across Javed Saab's work. Our shared history, absence of a peaceful and mutually beneficial order in the region, and a hostility that only surges and seldom dips bother him as a student of history and a keen observer of international affairs. That brings me to the other collection titled Shade and Light. JJ has gone into considerable depth of certain matters which remain points of discord within and among Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. He has also written a number of pieces on the person, politics, crucial decisions made by him, and the underlying vision of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He has clarified some facts which are either selectively used or distorted in other writings about Mr. Jinnah. There's a section on global affairs as well, which speaks to both Pakistani and international audiences or readerships. Ladies and gentlemen, I must confess, and Javed Saab knows about it, that any reader may have a different analysis or a point of view from that of Javed Saab's, like on occasions I myself have divergent views on matters relating to the Pakistan ideology and its interpretations, or the making of Bangladesh, or who is more responsible for creating a hostile neighborly relationship between Pakistan and India. However, I should also confess that these books are making me revisit some of my previously held notions. Not all, but definitely some. And provide an opportunity to further the dialogue which is informed, rich, purposeful, and evidence-based. As far as points of convergence are concerned, which are more than points of divergence, who can disagree that JJ's solutions to our media ills are most conclusive and practical? His desire and effort to create a truly inclusive, plural, and progressive Pakistan are exceptionally remarkable. His understanding of Pakistan's and South Asia's cultural rubric is highly rich. These books are a worthy addition to our corpus of social, political, and cultural history. JJ, I congratulate you and thank you again for publishing these works. We are in this journey together. और वो जो आतिश का शेर है कि सफ़र है शर्त मुसाफिर नवाज बहुतेरे हजार हा शजरे सायादार राह में है. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Arifa Noor. Ms. Arifa Noor is a journalist who has served as editor of The Herald and resident editor, Dawn Islamabad. She now writes a weekly column for Dawn newspaper and hosts a current affairs show for Dawn News. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ji. Unlike Haris Khalique, I don't have any prepared notes. So let's see if I can wing it. I'd like to begin by telling the story of how my first interaction with Javed Saab. I had just arrived at the Herald and Karachi, completely wet behind the ears, called him up and asked him to do a piece for us on the media. अब कराची का रहने वाला हो और आप Herald की तरफ से call कर रहे हो, तो even if the other person doesn't know you, they're going to write the article, and so he did. And then I edited it and I sent it back to him. I got a phone call. He made his displeasure very clear, but she said, acha theek hai. So I know two people in the world who can do this. They can give you a dressing down, and yet when you walk out of that room or that conversation, you still feel as if you've got it. One is Javed Jabbar Saab, the other is my former boss, Hamid Haroon. I haven't met a third person who can do it. And I think that's also a generation, kind of, that I really look up to because I've come across so many of them in my profession. And each time I meet them, you know, you see so many similar things. Renaissance men. They are men who can talk to you, people actually, not just men and women of that generation. They will always have a story to tell about a stage theater play that they put up years ago. They will always have friends who are great writers. अखबार में भी लिखा होगा, थिएटर भी लिखा होगा, फिल्म भी बनाई होगी. जावेद जब्बार साहब के पास तो खैर कहानियाँ हैं जो उन्होंने एड्स भी बनाई हैं. This is a generation that is just not there anymore, you know, and that is the person you find in these books, especially the thinner volume. Because, you know, there's an article that he's done on his film, there's an article in which he talks about the Peak Friends ad. There is the piece on Irfan Hussain where he talks about, and Aslam Azhar. They're like stories of Pakistan. And these are stories of a Pakistan that doesn't exist now, unfortunately. And I think, you know, that's very unfortunate because जो दूसरा volume है, Light and Shade wala, it's very interesting because, you know, I think the bulk of the book is where he's talking about Pakistan, the idea of a nation, what is a nation? And you can see him grappling with an idea. Again, I understand where he's coming from, but, you know, it's obviously, I can see that people that were dealing with a certain era, especially after 71, this is an idea you deal with. For us, it was just there in books. But when you read that, I can understand that question that probably was there constantly. We have too many other crises to deal with, to worry about things like whether Pakistan is a nation or not. We're worrying about whether it's going to survive or not as a country. But you know, this idea, and again, that Renaissance man who will start to talk in detail about history, how it happened, bring in Ernest Gellner, Benedict Anderson about what a nation is. It's hard to find people these days who will be able to go through such a wide variety of thoughts, books, ideas. And really, I think that is what this book brought across to me. And also this very tolerant Pakistan, in which somebody like Javed Jabbar Saab can write so fondly about being great friends with someone like Irfan Hussain, who was probably ideologically somewhere, you know, coming from a more left-wing view. आजकल तो आप घर वालों के साथ नहीं बैठ सकते if you don't agree on the same political party, you know. So these are the ideas. So this is not just a book of essays. For me, it's also a book of essays about a Pakistan that was, that I hope we can get back at some stage. And it's also a generation that it's very hard to say this, but when I read these books, I also understand why this was a generation that was more hopeful about Pakistan. You know, what Haris Khalique also spoke about, that when you write about, you know, Pakistan, its foreign policy, the region, if you have lived through the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, it's so much easier to feel that sense of pride because it's there in those essays. It's there in those incidents that he has witnessed. When he talks about the Karachi of the 60s, what it had to offer culturally. So it's, you know, it's a sense of loss for somebody like me when you're going through that book. Now, sometimes I also get a little angry because I feel, I mean, you know, what have they left for us? But the sense of loss is much greater. The thinner volume is closer to my heart, I would say. I enjoyed reading it far more because it was about the media. And in fact, I wish, as someone who had more than just a ringside seat to these events, Javed Saab needs to write a more detailed account of the media in Pakistan. Like, for example, for a journalist, you know, this sentence that he writes in passing in one of them, that in Pakistan, the government adds to the newspapers, pay far less than what the private sector pays, but somehow this is the other way around in television. You were right there. You know exactly how it happened. You need to tell us those stories. I mean, you know, for the journalists, so we know how this industry works. So as I said, it's just so much. It's hard to sort of encapsulate my feelings because it brought so much home. But it's fascinating, and I don't, and one, again, a sense of loss. We're even losing the newspapers in which people like Javed Jabbar Saab, or if there are any current Javed Jabbar Saabs who are still to become the JJs, will have a place to write. They're dying. And again, full marks to the tolerance that existed, that he's written an article in which he criticizes the Dawn, and it's published in Dawn. And in another, it's written, it's published in the news, and he's, you know, criticized the news editorial policy. आराम से तारीफें करके 4 paragraphs में 5वें में 2 जुमले डाल के ना उनकी editorial policy या उसको भी criticize कर दिया. So it's just absolutely fascinating. I can just express praise for it in amazement. Truly, it's a world that I fear doesn't exist anymore. Thank you, Javed Sahab.
Thank you, ma'am, for your enlightening thoughts. It is my honor. Short? Okay, sir. It is my honor to introduce our chief guest for today, Senator Javed Jabbar. Reading out his exhaustive list of achievements is not an easy task. However, I will take the liberty to restricting myself to a few of his achievements. Okay, sir. Okay, his work includes writing 21 books to date as of 2024, and some are available on Amazon. Filmmaking, media, advertising, voluntary service, education, environment, performing arts education, national and global affairs. One of his recent books, What is Pakistaniyat, is widely prescribed for study in civil and military institutions. His 3 recent political memoirs cover his working experiences with Benazir Bhutto, Farooq Laghari, Miraj Khalid, and Pervez Musharraf. On 14th August 2024, he was awarded the Hilal-e-Imtiaz for literature. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inam ul-Haq Saab, Chairman IPRI, Ambassador Raza Mohammed Saab, President, Brigadier Naveed Ali, Mr. Ishtiaq Mekari, the whole very helpful IPRI team, Janjua Saab as well, and distinguished guests. Thank you very much for sparing the time and for being here. I'm deeply touched by the invitation that Ambassador Raza Mohammed kindly gave, and for his hospitality and courtesy, and the remarks, and these 2 characters who have also consented to address, characters, not in a disparaging sense, to have character. My God, it's a great achievement to have character. I don't say that in any way negatively. These 2 distinct individuals. All individuals are distinct, but some are more distinct when they have nice things to say about me. So, of course, I'm sure you also bear some goodwill. I'm privileged to be a friend of so many esteemed persons here, who I cannot acknowledge individually. But I'm deeply touched, Haris Khalique and Arifa Noor, for all the gracious things that you have said about my books and about myself. Deeply touched. I only wish Shabnam was here. Dekha, whenever something nice is said about you, your wife should make the effort to come, to be there. And there's not even live transmission. It's not going out on the channels live telecast, nahi? Ambassador? I thought all channels should be, nahi? Acha, it is on YouTube. Acha, I hope my dear wife watches it or listens to it. So it's so good to be back in IPRI. Such a well-maintained premises, mashallah. इनाम साहब के तशरीफ लाने से पहले बोर्ड पर गलती से हमें भी दावत दी गई कि हम भी चेयरमैन बने IPRI के 1999-2000 में. तो जब आप पैदा हो गए थे रजा मोहम्मद साहब? 25 साल हो गए, 25 साल। ओह या, शुक्रिया, मुझे नहीं बुलाया गया। मुझे कोई पता भी नहीं चला कि आपके 25वें साल हो गए। हालांकि मुझे याद आ रहा था, कुछ खटक रही थी बात कि आई थिंक एप्री शुड नाउ बी 25, बट यू हैव डन सो मच गुड वर्क, and under the able leadership of Ambassador Inamul Haq, with whom I've also enjoyed the privilege of being associated briefly during General Musharraf's time, but more extensively during the non-media reported Track 2 dialogue with India known as the Neemrana Initiative, which has stalled since the BJP took office. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And these two books are presented to you for your perusal. And when I do that, I often think, truly, what is writing about? It's meant to be about communication. Of course, writing is about communication. But the great thing about writing is, as a medium, writing for print, unlike all other media, where there's some other extraneous element interfering. With television, it's the camera. With the radio, it's the microphone. With the exhibition of paintings, there's always someone coming in to see the paintings. But with writing, it is the ideal form of solitude. You are by yourself, and you are communicating, in a sense, with yourself. You are writing for yourself. It might sound very selfish. It's very self-indulgent. But writing is really about a dialogue with the self. And, of course, it's a bonus if other people read what you have written. Even if one other person reads it, our job is done. A writer's job is done. It doesn't matter in the least whether these books sell or they don't sell. And surprisingly, they are selling. You know, and I say that not to promote them. On the way here at the Karachi airport bookshops, I was ready to complain to the no sight and sound of streams and shade and light, and there you are promoting Zahid Hussein's book and so on. I mean, ye kya hai? Hum bhi kisi se kam nahi. But when I say something, it's not to mean that Zahid Hussein's book don't sell. They said, sir, जो आई थी बिक गई, अब हम इंतजार कर रहे हैं next supply का. तो एक नहीं बल्कि तीनों जगहों पे ये कहा गया. So there are some people actually indiscreet and unwise enough to spend money to buy my books of all things when there are so many other far better books to read. Haris Khalique's books, for example, Zahid Hussein's books, and soon Arifa Noor's Confessions, Confessions of a TV anchor and editor of Herald. So the good thing about Pakistan is, despite our low levels of literacy, despite the low levels of book sales per capita, it's a paradox in Pakistan. We actually have a large number of very good writers and at least a dozen very good publishers. Publishers who may not be as well known as OUP, Oxford University Press, or Sange-Meal, or Paramount, my publishers. But there are there, whether it's in Urdu Bazaar, or whether it is Jhelum, which Haris referred to earlier. My God, there are people producing very good, interesting books on a wide range of subjects. There is Shamim Ahmad Saab, author of his most recent book, Recollections of Miraj Muhammad Khan. You know, the one and only Miraj Muhammad Khan. I wonder if IPRI will ever dare to host a book about him, Miraj Muhammad Khan. He was an iconoclast, but certainly deserving of attention. So, writing, I was saying, it doesn't matter. Of course, it tickles the ego to know that books are being sold and people are commenting and saying very gracious things about them. but one must persevere and not be influenced by social media's tendency to be referred to in the context of something going viral. Oh, 200,000 likes, 20,000 likes, 5 dislikes, or whatever. But these matters, these numbers, make absolutely no difference to me. Content cannot be judged by the number of people who are willing to see the content, but its own intrinsic value. And I'm not offering these 2 books as if they have intrinsic value. I'm very touched by all the positive things they've said about the books. But it helps me, once an anthology is assembled, it gives you a unique opportunity to be self-critical, to view what you said or wrote 5 years ago and what you are now seeing in the light of day in 2024. And it doesn't mean what you wrote 5 years ago has to be pertinent and true even today. How can it be? Conditions change. The person himself changes. The writer changes. So you can't always be consistent. Winston Churchill said it beautifully. He said, what did he say? He said, I have been accused of inconsistency. But let me tell you that eating my own words has made for a delicious meal most of the time, because he's had to eat his own words and repent what he said earlier. But when we look at the scope of these 2 books, one is tempted to say that Streams looks at events, elections in the United States, because the US election is not a concern of the US alone. It's an election that will have a global impact, even though in many respects the foreign policies of the Democrats and the Republicans are only marginally different. On some issues, yes, they may be different. But on most issues, America will continue to retain 800 military bases around the world, and come Republicans or Democrats, they will advance their geostrategic, compulsive desire to dominate the world militarily, even though new polarities are emerging. But when we look at Europe or the UK, one has dared to say that democracy, which we normally associate with the collective wisdom of the people, is often not so. People are capable of being extremely unwise, which is not to decry or to demean human beings. In theory, they are supposed to be the repository of collective good sense. But considering the flawed electoral judgments that even mature democracies have made, it just appalls one. You have one of the world's oldest parliamentary democracies, the United Kingdom, holding a referendum on whether to stay part of the European Union or leave. Fundamental constitutional issue. And what does David Cameron, the Prime Minister, do? And the whole of Britain accepts it. Let's go for a referendum. A referendum which requires a bare majority vote. And lo and behold, they hold a referendum. And with a narrow margin of 2 or 3%, the entire direction of Britain is changed because of the sheer unwisdom of democracy. And therefore, democracy is not something to be taken for granted. One man, one vote, fair elections. You can have very fair elections and yet produce results that are absolutely damaging, destructive. Look at the United States. Israel is the ugliest example of democracy in action. They hold elections regularly. Next door, mashallah, a country that has not benefited from military interventions like we have. Benefited, is that the right word? Knowing who our host is, I better say benefited. Has benefited by what does it do? It, in a country that is enlightened enough, kudos to the people of Pakistan. Wow, what a country we are. A country founded on the basis of Muslim religious identity and 11 general elections, 1970 to 2024. Never once do the illiterate, semi-literate, uneducated people of Pakistan give religious political parties a majority vote. Wow, wow, wow. Taali baja lein yaar. Apne liye hi taali baja lein. Fantastic. Whereas right next door, in a country that prides itself to be a secular country that elects the BJP not once, not twice, thrice, 3 consecutive terms for a party based on a narrow, extremist, imbalanced view of Hinduism, which in itself is not an extremist philosophy. It is a philosophy, it's not a religion. And it has so many forms of Hinduism. But Hindutva, which has not only had disastrous consequences for India internally, it poisons the hegemony that India is already capable of in the region. Democracy in action. So democracy needs continuous refinement and reforms. Even more so in Pakistan. Look at what we have just come through. 8th of February, 2024. It's a first in global electoral history. First. Why do I make such an exaggerated, sweeping statement? I'll try and justify it. In every election, parties and candidates go looking for voters. In February 2024, after the alliance between the Supreme Court and the Election Commission, a major political party, of which I'm not a member, in fact, I'm quite critical of some of their terrible decisions, is deprived of its well-known election symbol, the cricket bat, and doesn't even participate as a party. So, what do the candidates with PTI links do? They are allotted a bewildering, amusing, bizarre range of symbols. किसी को बैगन दे दिया है, किसी को ट्रैक्टर, किसी को पेंसिल, किसी को हैमर, पत्थर. My God. And what do the people do? They are looking at election symbols. Share, Ajib, Jabbar, share, PMLN. They're looking at arrows, People's Party. Here, for the first time, the voter goes out looking for the party and the symbol and the candidate. And what is the result? The result is that independent candidates get 18 million votes and the share gets only 14 million and the arrow gets only 8 million. So you have the first time in global electoral history, independents with a complete, riotously different set of symbols, together getting more than established parties and symbols. Fantastic. Look at the maturity. Look at the dedication of the average Pakistani voter. But is that enough to pat ourselves on the back? No. Because our system is still non-representatively democratic. Half the people don't vote. Even in February, barely 47% voted. 47%. And we've just witnessed a constitutional amendment which had parties claiming and proving two-third majority in the Senate and in the National Assembly. How did they get this two-third majority? Two-third majority of the people or two-third majority of the seats? Because the absurd first-past-the-post electoral system that we use, blindly adopted from Westminster, is the first-past-the-post system. And what does that do? It says parties that get a minority of the popular vote, a minority, can get a majority of the seats. A minority of the vote, majority of the seats, as has happened in India, where BJP got 38%, but got the highest number of seats in the Lok Sabha and distort the whole Indian psyche. What happens here? We know what happens here. So, in real terms, the parties that voted for the 26th constitutional amendment received barely 18% of the total registered votes and 44% of the cast vote. Not a majority, leave alone a two-third majority. So this absurdity of the electoral system needs reform. Democracy needs continuous reform. And of course, the legislators who will have to vote to reform have a vested interest not to reform, because they don't have to work hard. You just get 15% of the vote and you get a 5-year term in every constituency that you can win. So, the two fundamental reforms that we need to make, and we can make them, we've been advocating them for a long time. When I met Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani, 12 years ago, he immediately endorsed it, but alas, neither his government nor successive governments have followed up to make voting compulsory, as 23 other countries do. And if in the first round a candidate does not get 50% plus one vote, you have a second round or a third round until a candidate actually gets a majority vote. I know it's tiresome, it's fatiguing, but that's the only way to make elections and democracy truly representative of the popular will. I have only two more submissions to make, which I've hinted at partly here, written about. And that is the ideology of Pakistan. This is a fascinating phrase, the ideology of Pakistan. I realized it for the first time when I had to take oath as a member of the Senate in 1985. I hereby swear to uphold the Islamic ideology of Pakistan. And every president, prime minister, ministers, everyone holding a public office solemnly swears. But the fact is, there is to this date no document validated by the legislatures or by the Supreme Court or by the Council of Islamic Ideology which defines what is the ideology of Pakistan. What do we mean when we say the ideology of Pakistan? No one wants to commit themselves. Of course, they say Islam is the ideology of Pakistan, but Islam cannot be. Islam is a religion. Ideologies cannot be religion because ideologies change with time. Communism changed. In the Soviet Union, it collapsed. In China, it is alive and well, political communism. Economic communism has changed. Ideologies change with objective conditions. So there is an essay here which says that the ideology of Pakistan is ambivalent because it is also based on territory, apart from faith. It is also dynamic because it is being influenced by trade, by telecommunication, by connectivity, by interaction with other countries, by knowledge, science. We can't be immune to that. And therefore, the ideology of Pakistan is evolving through ijtihad in Islam, of which there is not enough, but there is sometimes ijtihad. Family law ordinance by Ayub Khan was one form of ijtihad. We need to make it much more robust, especially when the Council of Islamic Ideology pronounces that in rape cases, DNA evidence is not admissible. Ooh. Astounding. Astounding. That sometimes when the CII has actually given some reasonably balanced observations, it rejects something that is a globally accepted definition of proof. So, ideology of Pakistan needs to be constantly explored, stated, discussed, argued, without someone being accused of committing blasphemy or being strung up the way that terrible tragedy took place in Umarkot in Sindh a few weeks ago. And lastly, I just want to say that one of the things I was reinforced by through the writings contained in these two books is that history is far more of a mystery than the future. Normally we think the future is unknown, because obviously we don't know what the future is going to be. But it's actually history which is the mystery. We know the dates, Quaid-e-Azam, when he was born, when he passed away, when did Pakistan become independent, we know. How many people in our country know why 14th of August? Why 15th of August? Why? I'm not conducting a test here in a school. But throughout the country, wherever one goes, whether it is schools or universities, barely one person out of thousands has told me why the Independence Day of our beloved, unique, lovely country is 14th August. The arrogance, the ego of one man. And it's not Mr. Jinnah, certainly. It is good old Mountbatten. Wow. Lord Earl Mountbatten. What arrogance. He decides, why not make the birth of these two countries coincide with the date exactly 2 years ago when I, Lord Mountbatten, accepted the surrender of the Japanese forces on behalf of the Allied forces. So the character, 3rd of June, decides to impose his arrogance onto two new nation states, one of them Pakistan, totally unprepared, divided by a hostile country, 2 wings divided by 1,000 miles of hostile territory, leading to the loss of 1 million lives caused by panic, violence, bloodshed, lack of preparation, the migration of 10 million people in 18 months, the largest recorded migration in history. All this to satisfy the ego of Lord Mountbatten. History remains a mystery. This is just one part of what we need to do to understand how we were born, why we were born on that day. Why couldn't it have been June 48, the time given to him by Prime Minister Attlee? Take your time. And the man refuses to take the time and causes that fall. He at least had the grace in 1965, talking to a journalist with a Muslim name in London. And that journalist asked him, "Sir, when you look back at what happened in 1947. How do you see your role? And he had the good grace to say, I effed it up. And you can imagine what comes after the letter F. But it was too late by then. So the beauty of history is its mystery. There's so many other facets to discover. And I'm having tested the limits of your patience, I will conclude. And in case you have any questions, you better not. We can immediately proceed. But I'm willing to, they've kept this tempting chair here, which I'm supposed to now go and occupy, only to see if any one of you dares to ask me a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Senator, for the insightful discourse. Now we would open the floor for questions and answers. I would request the audience to please introduce yourself and kindly keep your questions brief so we can get maximum numbers of questions.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. This is Mariam, and I'm a researcher at Islamabad Policy Research Institute. So it's always a pleasure, and I had the first interaction with you during our Margala dialogue, and it is always a pleasure to host you in IPRI. So my question is brief. I would like to ask you about one thing that you allude to about the electoral reforms. You talked about plurality voting system. So do you think that transforming the system to proportional, or let's say second phase of the voting will change or reform the things for Pakistan, or the problem lies somewhere else, or problem is something else? I hope you get the idea. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I get the idea. No, certainly, logically speaking, I should, without qualification, support the idea of proportional representation, along with some other reforms. Sri Lanka uses proportional representation, along with first past the post. But I hesitate in endorsing it completely because, perversely, strangely, there will be a negative fallout. There are fringe extremist parties in Pakistan. Some of them have arisen to alarming popularity in the last 8 years or so, thanks to the congenital lack of courage of the state, or even covert encouragement. Now, these parties would become entitled to seats in the legislature because they have not won any seats in the federal parliament. They have managed to win one seat in the Sindh Assembly. Ironically, that would give them a louder voice, more respectability than they deserve. So I'm not too comfortable with the idea of proportional representation. I would much rather go for compulsory voting. I would much rather go for that 50% plus one second round to ensure true representational aspects. And certainly, I mean, I want to appreciate the reform introduced by General Pervez Musharraf. Fortunately, we agreed on that before I resigned, which is he became the first head of state and head of government who, at that time he was head of government, who then said that 33% of seats in all local government forums would be reserved for women and 17.5% in all other legislatures, which a reform that lasts till today. And I'm very amused when very pristine, noble, holy, elected, civil parliamentarians use the word dictator. Dictator ne ye kiya, dictator ne wo kiya. They have accepted every reform that that dictator made. They've even accepted the reform that General Ziaul Haq, not the least popular military dictator. He is the one who introduced through his arbitrary amendments the right of the Senate to initiate constitutional amendment bills, which they used just 5 days ago for the 26th Amendment. Otherwise, it used to be the preserve of the assembly alone. So we have such a mixed record of good amendments made by bad people and bad amendments made by elected people, very noble, holy, elected people. But that's Pakistan, the paradox and the beauty of Pakistan. And especially because there are people only slightly younger than myself, people in their 30s, 20s. I'm just in there. No man is over 40, as you know. No woman is over 30. So I'm about 32, 33 years now. So why do I say that? Huh? Sorry? Zahid Hussain is always muttering and mumbling while I'm speaking. It's his age. Age ka. I think in terms of youthfulness, the worst part of what we are going through as a country is this erosion of self-esteem. It is driven by our hypercritical, sometimes rightly hypercritical evaluation of our failures. And there's no denying we have failed in many respects. But the dark side to that is this almost concerted, systematic assault on our own self-confidence, our own self-esteem as human beings, as a nation. When I see young people doubting the rationale for Pakistan, I am so distressed. This is such a beautiful gift of a country. Incredible potential, incredible talent, energy, vitality. You travel around this country as often as I do. I've been through Sindh, Punjab recently, and Balochistan, and KP. My God, fantastic. You cannot just be infected by the vitality of our people. And it should be misleading because the vitality can exist along with internal decay. But we must never lose faith in the capacity of Pakistan to survive, in the rightness of this country's survival. We are the only country in this whole region that has the capacity to withstand the hegemony of our beloved neighbor to the east. And I say this while having enormous respect for Indian society, for the culture, the civilization, its plurality, its richness of literature, ethnicity, languages, all that. But the Indian state is another entity. The Indian state is focused on diminishing Pakistan, on reducing its capacity for self-assertion. And when we carry self-criticism to this extreme, we are inadvertently helping the very country that doesn't want us to flourish. Now, how do we strike a balance? I don't have an easy answer. I don't know how to continue to be self-critical without strengthening those forces that actually want to diminish our sense of self-confidence. And I suppose I just want to take refuge in one aspect of history and then conclude my comment, which is, please remember the miracle wrought by Mr. Jinnah. I mean, he overcame not one, not two, three formidable adversaries. The British, who did not want Pakistan, contrary to some of the theorists in India or academia or even in Pakistan who say, no, actually the British wanted to divide and rule. Arey Baba, divide and rule was a pre-47 strategy. the more and more reports are declassified, you see what they were writing to each other. They were even calling Mr. Jinnah preposterous. In fact, they've used, I think, the word terrible, used the word lunatic. They had no desire to see Pakistan created. He overcame them. Second, he overcame the Congress, far better organized, multi-religious party, even though Hinduism has always been at the core of the Congress creed, dressed up in secular garb. He overcame the Congress. Second. But he had a third adversary. At least 4 major Muslim religious forces which opposed the creation of Pakistan, which called him Kafir-e-Azam. He overcame them as well and managed to secure this incredible gift of Pakistan for us. And those 4 formidable religious forces overnight became the custodians of the ideology of Pakistan. Aye, aye, aye. They are now the sole arbiters. Even with the 26th Amendment, they've managed to sneak in some new provisions to further strengthen. About 97% of us are Muslims. Why do we need to be told day and night, 24 hours a day, you are Muslim? Of course we are Muslim. Every house in Pakistan has a Quran. Every family has someone praying 5 times a day. All throughout the year we are Muslims. But these 4 religious forces are not satisfied because they don't have any intellectual depth or connection with the reality of science, technology, change, ijtihad, which should be the essence. So, value Pakistan and help preserve and build this beautiful country to its full potential. Thank you.
Next question.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum ji. This is Safdar Suhail. Yeah, well, I've been a civil servant, but now I'm running a think tank called Social Protection Resource Center, and we recently did a national survey on the state of egalitarianism in Pakistan, and 95% people thought or told that Pakistan of 60s and 70s was much more egalitarian than today's Pakistan, and if we continue with this trend, we are looking to a future of a very inegalitarian Pakistan. Now, you have spoken about the Pakistan of 60s and 70s. What happened, and what can be done to reverse that? Thank you.
I don't know about the 70s. Yeah, there was some egalitarianism there because of the populism of Z.A. Bhutto, a misleading populism. But the 50s and the 60s were really fired by the spirit and the vision of the Qaid. Even though he died in September 48, the things we achieved in the first 18 years of Pakistan have been unrivaled thereafter. They are the forgotten part of our history. And youth in particular needs to revisit our history and discover what did we do, how did we manage. A country given 6 months to survive by the Indians managed to overtake the Indian rate of economic growth. A country dismissed out of hand by our neighbor manages to excel in sports. I want to share that episode. How can we forget that? 1958, January 1958, we are barely 11 years old. 11 years old as a country. And we produced this character who is very tall. He's 5 feet 1 inch. And he goes off with this cricket team to the West Indies for the first time. No experience. And he's facing these bowlers who are 6 foot at least tall. Home ground. Hot weather. First innings, Pakistan collapses. West Indies come and score 350, 400. we are bound to lose by an innings. Out goes this 5 foot 1 inch man and thinks, say, he'll be out in about an hour. He lasts the whole day. Then the next day comes, he lasts the whole day. The third day comes, he lasts the whole day. Hanif Mohammad plays the longest ever test innings in history. Unbroken record to this day. Why do I bring it up? This is not just cricketing skill. This was a demonstration of character. He showed courage and character and faith in Pakistan and pride in Pakistan. 1958. 2 years later, Nasir Bunda gets us the Olympic gold medal in hockey. 2 years later, 1960, we defeat India. That's in sports. Brojan Das, East Pakistani swimmer, defeats 27 other swimmers who cross the English Channel and become world champion. That's the kind of Pakistan we were producing. Economic growth rate, overtaking India. They were saying this is the Hindu rate of growth compared to the Muslim rate of growth. Benefiting from the Korean War boom. The state setting up industries and handing them over to the private sector through the PIDC, PICA, NIT. Kya baat. Creating this whole infrastructure. Of course, also creating inequalities, heading towards the disaster of East Pakistan, but also producing Azam Khan, a military West Pakistani general who becomes governor of East Pakistan and becomes a folk hero of the Bengalis. A folk hero, a West Pakistani military general, because he goes and loves the people of Bengal, serves them. I mean, we have extraordinary capacities to produce egalitarianism. And the sheer numbers that we are producing, Mubarak ho, I mean, we are so good at making babies, as you know. In the next 70 years, we are scheduled to become 511 million people, given our current rate of even slightly reduced growth, 2.4 to 2.5%. We will then be the third largest country in the world after China and India. Now, 500 million people can't be held down by any elites, I am convinced. Their sheer hunger, greed, restlessness will compel structural change and reform. It will have to come. Unfortunately, it will probably be violent. I hope it isn't. But I think that will be unavoidable because there will be very entrenched forces of capitalism, consumerism, controls of all kinds, civil and military, resisting this egalitarian upsurge. I hope it's not bloody and it's not, it will come. Thank you. I think Cinderella time is coming. Yeah. Sorry? Yes? अरे आप तो मेज़बान, you are an associate मेज़बान भाई, मेज़बान का तो बहुत हक बनता है.
Thank you so much, sir. As a celebrated writer and a great orator you are. So, you have rightly talked about the art of communicating, the passion for writing. But unfortunately, we live in an era when nobody frequents to libraries. The only shop that is empty in a mall is a bookshop, and people don't have the passion to read and write. Print media has almost exterminated, has been exterminated. It's going down the drain. Only a few hundred copies of every major dailies are published now. So as a writer, as a celebrated writer, what do you think should be the recourse for the value of word and thought in the next 10 years? And what is the minimum that needs to be done to rekindle the hope that people should start reading and writing? Your word on that.
Jabbar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megri sir. But you yourself are a well-respected columnist. You've been a journalist and you continue to write, mashallah, Express Tribune mein. As I submitted earlier, there is still a core group of Pakistanis who are still reading paper-printed books and newspapers. I know they are much less than what they should be, but they're reading on the computer screen as well. The web versions of newspapers are very widely read. Dawn, for example, dawn.com, the overseas version, I mean, 2 point, pata nahi, how many million hits per day they get. So the print circulation, yes, is declining, but the content part is still very widely accessed. And the same applies in lesser numbers to the News and Express Tribune. So fortunately, there is a desire on many people's part to read. The forms of reading will change, have changed already. It's all over the world. It's all over the world. Even, I mean, you know, The Guardian, which is one of the best newspapers of Europe and the world, it's facing, if it hadn't been for the trust which owns other periodicals and property, they subsidize the life of The Guardian. Otherwise, it would go out of print. New York Times has been always facing a problem. Washington Post, whatever. So there is hope. And one should continue to write. Doesn't matter. I will be your reader. Arifa, Noor and Haris Khalique minimum. And Zahid Hussain will be your readers. अब एक हाँ तो कह दो यार. चार तो हो गए ना, 4 readers.
I think more people read now than they used to.
Yes.
Online, everywhere in the world now, newspapers, Pakistani newspapers are being read.
And being quoted.
And quoted also.
बहुत अच्छी. Absolutely, Zahid. इश्तियाक ये अजीब व माशाल्लाह बड़ी अच्छी बात है. कई दफ़ा in emails and WhatsApp I get comments about articles they have read on the web, whether it's written by Haris or Zahid or Arfa Noor or Ishtiaq Mekri. There are people outside Pakistan and in Pakistan reading. There should be many more, but
I think broadsheets cover. But the book, I was reading somewhere that the English language books in the Anglophone world,
yes.
उसमें पिछले 2023 में 8% इजाफा हुआ
Yes.
in sales.
Absolutely. और उससे कबल हारिस एक और बड़ी मीठी खबर थी, कुछ 4 साल हो गए, that the Publishers Association of America said the sale of paper printed books for children has actually gone straight up. Despite children being addicted to cell phones and tabs and tablets and so on, even children are rediscovering the pleasures of paper printed books.
More books are being read on Kindle.
On Kindle, absolutely right.
The readership has not gone down, but basically it's a different format.
People are reading in different formats. जी, Father साहब.
उनके ख्याल में कि ऐसे लोग जो हिस्ट्री को जज्बात और पैशन से देखते हैं, उनकी कमी होती जा रही है, आपकी तरफ इशारा था. और एक कारनामा वो भी था उस मोहतरम का जिसका नाम लिया आपने, मुशर्रफ का, कि 17 साल की एज, मेरा ख्याल है वोटर्स की 18 साल की, वो 3 साल 21 से 18 साल को,
From 21 to 18.
दैट वाज आल्सो समथिंग. तो वो जो एज कम होने की वजह से जो यंग यूथ का जो इलेक्शंस में और इस प्रोसेस में आए हैं,
सही.
अब वो हिस्ट्री को शायद उस जज्बात से नहीं देख सकते, और उस वजह से उनके लिए ये मुश्किल है कि ये स्टेट जो है इट्सेल्फ अपनी सोसाइटी को डिमिनिश करने पर लगी हुई है. और इस डिमिनिशन का 8 फरवरी का आपने जिक्र किया, उसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मैं, कि वो लोग तो जाते हैं कि वो अपने आप को रिप्रेजेंट करें.
I know.
तो इस बारे में क्या कि अब अरफा नूर की जो है पेशन गोई जो है वो तो इस बात पे अफसोस का इजहार कर रही थी, लेकिन हकीकत तो ये है.
अरफा नूर साहिबा आप बेहतर जवाब दे सकती हैं, बट अरफा नूर साहिबा को मैं चाहता हूँ, आई थिंक वी शुड लिबरेट हर फ्रॉम द एंस्लेवमेंट ऑफ टेलीविजन and take her out into the country and just be free of TV channels.
I wish to, but I have a salary that I need to.
I know. Yes, you're right. You're right. Well said. No, बिल्कुल सही कह रहे थे. Sorry. Yes. अच्छा जी रानी साहब जी तशरीफ रखें प्लीज बैठिए
Always nice listening to you, JJ. Amazing with what speed you can write books. I barely caught up with the first two or three, but the points that you have raised were many before. I just picked up two. But before that, when you said if anyone would dare to ask you a question, my reading was that you were provoking us because you love to answer questions. I was not going to ask any question with which one had some expertise. The ones that have been raised by you, and they intrigue me nowadays very much, about reforms. We expect reforms to be carried out both those people who are the beneficiaries of a particular system. We are not going to commit suicide. The United Nations is not going to do it because the interests of P5, for example, get here, when we ask about political reform, you know, this is the only system with which such brotherhoods and the mafias and the dynasties can come up. Otherwise, they'll be swept away. So that's just one. And the second is probably also related with this. You talked about state. The state and society are certainly not the same thing. Almost everywhere, there is a big, huge disconnect, even in the best of democracy. Nowadays, you can see the prevailing sentiment. I mean, the state does not look after the poor people here. That is old story. But haven't we found out, talking about democracy and all, democratically elected governments ignore the sentiment on that and can get away with that? Maybe you can try and elaborate in these two.
that, but I don't want to because our Cinderella time is 4:30 and we must respect that. But I think that sometimes radical reforms, radical is a comparative word, can take place provided there is a vested interest. I mean, the 18th Amendment took place because there was clearly the desire to create their own fiefdoms and kingdoms under the garb of provinces. That was clearly, and the evidence is so apparent now, 20 years or whatever, 15 years after the amendment. So there was a vested interest at work. But sometimes, legislators have had the vision to transcend narrow interests and cooperate. And one example is the 1991 Water Accord, where actually on a very sensitive subject like water, all 4 provinces agreed on a formula, which is still, despite trouble, being respected. So one clutches at these straws that our legislators can show the capacity to cooperate. And sometimes at the provincial level particularly, in Sindh, which in terms of corruption and misgovernance is another matter, but in terms of progressive legislation has shown the capacity to introduce laws to prevent domestic violence, to prevent forced conversion from other religions to Islam, forced early marriages, etc. So there was a consensus there within the assembly on that. I agree. Either a traumatic event like a revolution occurs, and through that revolution you introduce major reforms. An illegal revolution or a legal revolution that comes as a process of election is another matter. But on the second point, yeah, it's a paradox that those very people who benefit are hardly likely to allow that. But that struggle will continue. It's a question of continuous struggle. And inshallah it will hopefully evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now request President IPRI, Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed, to please deliver his concluding remarks.
सर आपकी इजाज़त के साथ इतनी बातों के बाद कुछ रहता नहीं कहने को. एक बच्चे ने कोई क्वेश्चन करना था, बेटा आप चाय में कर लीजिएगा, ठीक है, अभी टी ब्रेक होगी तो आप पूछ लीजिएगा क्वेश्चन. There are only two things, sir, the two comments I want to make. Number one is, जो अभी partially एम्बेसडर दुरानी ने भी और जनरल दुरानी ने भी बोला कि आप इतना ज़्यादा कैसे लिख लेते हैं, इतना कुछ और इतना ज़्यादा और इतना वर्सटाइल. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's a God-gifted quality. And you must thank Allah. We must thank Allah that He has given us a person like you who can write so well and speak so well. मैं एंड करूँगा कुरान की उन आयात के साथ जो शुरू में बोली गई, सुनाई गई. अल्लामल इंसान इक़रा बिस्मि रब्बिकल्लज़ी खलक़ खलक़ल इंसान मिन अलक़ इक़रा व रब्बुकल अक्रमुल्लज़ी अल्लम बिल कलम अल्लमल इंसान मा लम यअलम. कि कलम के साथ सिखाया, वो सिखाया जो पहले उसको नहीं आता था. तो जो कलम वाले लोग हैं, आप ऑथर्स जो यहाँ बैठे हैं, आप हैं, मेरे ख्याल में आप एक डिवाइन काम कर रहे हैं. अल्लाह का जो काम है उसमें हिस्सा डाल रहे हैं. इट्स नॉट अ स्मॉल थिंग टू राइट. सो थैंक यू सो मच. गॉड ब्लेस यू मोर. बहुत शुक्रिया.
I would now request President IPRI, Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed, to please present memento.